Welcome, everyone. My name is Daniel Kelly, and you are joining us for the WNBA's Commitment to Social Justice presentation. We're joined today by Bethany Donovan, who is the head of league operations for the WNBA. I'm Dr. Daniel Kelly. I am the current chair of the Board of Commissioners for COSMA, as well as a clinical associate professor of sport management and the academic director for graduate programs at the Preston Roberts Institute for Global Sport. So Bethany, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, great. Our first question, I'd like to dive a bit into your background, talk about your playing days at Stanford, all the way to your career path in WNBA, plus your time overseas. Social justice throughout your career path, has it always been something that was a passion for you since your days at Stanford?
I think when you're maybe as a virtue of being a women's basketball player, I think you're always part of something bigger. I think you're always recognizing that women's sports continues to fight for a place at the table in the broader sports landscape. And so I do think that early in my career, I was aware of that. And I think that the WNBA launched kind of right before I started my playing career at Stanford, and I think it was really a testament to the power of Title IX, and and you think about the progress that women's sports had made up until 1997 when the league was founded, and the success of the Olympic team in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. There was momentum, and I think that it was about people fighting for the importance of this game, the women's game, in the broader sports landscape, as I said. So I do think that understanding that women's sports do face kind of some disadvantages when it comes to attention, corporate sponsorships, media coverage. And so, I think I felt that as an athlete, and certainly I see that now as an executive. But throughout my journey, I think I was, when you're playing, but I do think that you're recognizing the platform that you have, and wanting to do important things in your community as you progress in your athletic career. So I think I've always been conscious of the broader social issues that surround being a women's basketball player.
Okay, great. And then my next question has to do with context. You have, played in Northern California. You have played in New York City. You've also played overseas, places like Spain, Turkey, and Italy. Have you seen the same social justice issues overseas as well?
I think it's, it was different, when you're kind of other, you're fighting for, your place, and you're fighting for equity. I think that there was certainly, elements of that at each kind of stopping point in my career. When you're at Stanford, it was, there was there's a very small population of people of color. And I mean, Stanford was a great experience, but certainly you're aware of the fact that you're, in a minority group. And so, I think, fortunately, I think my experience there was really positive, and I felt like, we were able to talk about social issues openly, and in an environment that fostered, healthy dialogue around topics that were hard even back then. Overseas, it was a different challenge. Not only was I, like maybe the only, person of color, Black woman, but I was also an American. And so how do you manage both identities while you're, in a foreign environment? And so, there were times when I felt out of place, not just because I was American, but also because I was a Black woman American. And, so I think that, for me, I don't know that those were the defining things about my experiences playing, but certainly there is an awareness of the ways that you're different. And there's awareness of the ways that you want the world to be. And so I think that there are stereotypes, there are, things that certainly I faced when I was overseas, but, I don't think that the moment around, social justice was anything like what it is now, many moons ago when I was playing. I think now athletes have a much different platform to talk about the issues that they care about. The WNBA has certainly had a long history, and it's part of the fabric of the league that players have stood up for the issues that matter most to them. And so, I think it's escalated to an important place now, and I think that athletes recognize that the power that they have in their voices, and we as a league certainly think that that's an important thing to stand on. And I think certainly in recent years we've stood more boldly in, I think, what our authentic values are.
I really want to dive into the authentic values aspect you just mentioned. Um, your experience in the bubble, in the women's bubble down at in Bradenton at the IMG Academy. How would you describe that time period and the feeling of the players and the staff and just the WNBA as a whole trying to cope with COVID-19 plus what was happening across the country?
Right. Well, it was a very, I think, pivotal time for our league. As we were in the process of planning to have a single site season, which was an incredible endeavor on its own, we also realized that we were kind of navigating two pandemics when you think about the kind of fight for social justice and the fight against COVID-19 happening at the same time. And so we immediately integrated the building of our social justice platform into the planning for our season. And in fact, we announced the Justice Movement, which is our social justice platform, the same day the players were arriving in Bradenton. And so, for us, the two went hand in hand. I think for the players, it went hand in hand that, a season had to stand for more than basketball. And we had a unique opportunity to, be in the same place all at the same time, bring our collective voices to bear and to stand, as I said, on the values of the league. I think we didn't have to make it up on the spot. We didn't have to kind of come up to speed or get in line with the times. We actually already stood for the fight for social justice and at the 24 years, soon to be 25 years of our existence.
Yeah, I really appreciate those words, especially with the justice movement. I thought it was a fantastic and phenomenal endeavor. The justice movement talks about driving impactful, measurable, and meaningful change. For as much as you can tell us, how do you measure the impact of the justice movement?
Yeah, it's really hard to measure impact in some ways. And the thing is, as we built the justice movement, I think we were clear that there's so much that we wanted to tackle. There were so many issues that deserve attention, and so many issues that our players are passionate about. Ultimately, for the 2020 season, we had a very focused approach. And I think for us, it was also important to put a female lens on top of our social justice platform. So we were, Black Lives Matter was on the court, Black Lives Matter was on the warm-up shirt, but Say Her Name was also on the warm-up shirt, because we wanted to make sure that there was an intersectional approach to building our platform and to recognize that, our league faces additional challenges. Like, our league is 70% Black. Our league is obviously women. Our league has, LGBTQ plus representation. So how do we address building a platform that acknowledges those facets of who our players are and the fights that then come from being a marginalized group, not once or twice, but 3 times, and maybe others if you really think about the broad spectrum of who our players are and who they represent. And so I think that we were fortunate to have alignment across our players union, the league office leadership, our team leadership, and the players who ultimately were the face and the power of our movement. And because of that alignment, we were able to say, okay, what are we really trying to get done? And we have a very short period of time to create something that feels powerful. And so we had really focused conversations. We brought really seasoned people in the social justice space to the table with us. ultimately I'm an operator. I'm an operations and strategy person, and obviously I have a player lens as well. I don't work in an organization at the grassroots level, planning and initiatives and understanding the policies that have to be changed in order to really see some of the societal evolving that we want. And so I think for us, having that council in place in conjunction with the justice movement, was really important. We brought a cohort of really strong women leaders in social justice into advisory board that allowed us to get educated. And the pillars for that program were education, action, and amplification. And the education piece was really, really the foundation. We wanted to make sure that the players were equipped to go out and organize and create the conversations that needed to be had around certain topics. We talked with boldness around the female victims of police brutality and put Breonna Taylor's name on the back of the jerseys, because it was important that women were not lost in the broader Black Lives Matter movement. And then, I think we tackled things like, what's going to happen with the vote, and bringing elected officials to the conversation, and having conversations with people like Stacey Abrams. And, ultimately we saw what the players did in terms of their impact in the Georgia Senate runoff races. So, I think there was so much education and focus that was happening along the way, which was really remarkable when you consider that the players were playing every other day. And so, I think it speaks volumes about who the women of the WNBA are, that they were able to advance this platform and then also have the kind of season that they did.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned previously was that 70% of the players in the WNBA are Black. But the WNBA overall is a global league. Was it difficult to get everyone on board as far as moving forward with social justice?
I don't think it was. I don't think it was. I think we have wonderful diversity in our league. I think even the players who were not Black, took up the mantle, and they wanted to be great allies. And I think that we're so connected as wanting to grow the WNBA as a whole. And I think this was just a part of that. And so I don't think that there was really a struggle to get people on board with the fact that the WNBA had an opportunity to shed light on some really important issues, and to bring into the forefront, bring into the center people who are often forgotten and often marginalized.
All right, great. I'm going to transition a bit to what you mentioned about the WNBA, WNBPA's Social Justice Council, and the connections you made with prominent social activists like Nobel Peace Prize nominee Stacey Abrams. How are you able to make those types of connections? I mean, that's high level politics. How are you able to make those high level connections?
Well, I think it was all about partnership. I think between the union, the league, and the players, there are broad networks to leverage. And so I think that, and quite frankly, I think because of what the WNBA stands for, I think it's actually really a fit when we seek to engage kind of prominent, figures in society, and particularly powerful women. The league is a progressive league that boldly stands for the power of women. I think that that's something that people can get behind. And so when we reached out to people like Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who is from the African American Policy Forum, who started the Say Her Name campaign, coined the term intersectionality, she was like, I'm on board. What do I have to do? How do I sign up? And, we ran across that same dynamic over and over again as we brought people to the table to have conversations with us. And, whether that was the families of women who had been lost to police brutality, to people like Stacey Abrams, who obviously has an incredible platform. I think it was just a genuine interest in, who the players are, and a shared value system, I think. And so it was astounding to see the kinds of conversations that were being had. And but in some ways it makes sense because of, I think the players are multidimensional. They're college educated. They have many facets and many interests, and they took it upon themselves to really get underneath the issues, to not be performative in their social justice work, but to actually understand what they were standing up for. And I think it was it ultimately, when you talk, to go back to your question about how do you measure, I think that's the impact. I think the ability to bring conversations and to light, to see change actually happen, to drive things like voter registration, to drive things like completing the census. Those are actual tasks that were kind of performed, and I think it was not just about kind of a nebulous approach, or a broad and not strategic approach to the social justice work.
Okay, great. On a personal note, I wrote an op-ed for a Sport Business Journal on challenging the NBA to be about more than just creating spaces, but to create action. And I use the WNBA and their players as an example of the players meeting the voters at the polls and being proactive. How do you foresee players continuing to be active? Because social justice is like a never-ending marathon. And so continuing those efforts and showing up for midterm elections, showing up for the Georgia Senate runoffs, how do you continue the momentum?
I think that one of the interesting things and it's a question that our players asked of these kind of advisors that came to the table with us for the Social Justice Council, is like, how do you stay motivated? How do you re-energize? Because it is heavy. It's hard work. Sometimes it feels slow moving. So how do you stay, in the fight? And it's really just like it's a methodical kind of repeated commitment to what you think is right, and a repeated commitment to educating yourself and holding elected officials accountable. And even now, obviously, there's a new administration in place. Like, what happens over the next 100 days? How do you kind of get versed in what the policy issues are, and understand who you need to be talking to continue to push things the way you need them to go. And then how do you connect with the right people who are also aligned in your mission, and so that collectively you're doing the work together and energized in that way as well. So the players they're still in it. I mean, I think that we continue to meet as a Social Justice Council. We continue to think through what needs to happen as we approach our 25th season. We continue to try to build relationships and strengthen the network that the league has, and the league and its partners have with people that are doing the work on a day-to-day basis.
All right, great. You mentioned previously about the success of your partnerships, and I know that fundraising is a major aspect of activism. Have you seen an increase in fundraising efforts, or the amount of sponsorships and endorsements that are coming the league's way after the wobble in Bradenton, Florida?
What I think we're seeing is an eagerness to engage with the players around social justice. I think that as we when we announced our CBA in January of 2020, we also announced a Changemaker platform, where we have a cohort of sponsors who have made a real commitment to the league. And when you make a commitment to the league, you make a commitment to what the league stands for. And I think we're finding that there are companies who genuinely want to be connected to our platform, either because they're working toward growing their efforts in the social justice space, or because they already align really well with our values in that area. And so I think we're having really great conversations from a sponsorship standpoint, of people who saw what the league stood for. And I think yes, it was bold and progressive, but I also think that it's something that people are starting to talk more about and feel more comfortable with. And that's, I think, a sign of things going in the right direction.
Okay, fantastic. My next question is to do with the most recent race and gender scorecard that came out from the Tides report from UCF. And in that system, the WNBA received an A report card grade for diversity, which is amazing and fantastic. Was this a plan to be able to meet the diversity standards, or was it just organic in its implementation?
Yeah, so I think that's an important report, and obviously we're happy to score well on it. But I think we're less interested in the score on a report than we are with the kind of underlying realities that certainly inform that report. And I think it's great work that's being done to understand how sports organizations are faring when it comes to diversity inclusion practices. The league has been, I think, really great in taking a look at itself and understanding where there are areas of opportunity, where there are things that we're doing really well. I think it's always a push to continue to see people of color and women in leadership positions, and that's something that certainly takes an evaluation of your talent practices and understanding how are you attracting talent, what is the pipeline of talent that you're pulling from, how can you expand that, what are your career training and development priorities and tools and programs. So we are taking a deeper look at that. Despite the A, I think it's always important to continue looking at what can we do to be better, and so we are all the way from our players to the board of governors of our teams. Everybody is invested in making sure that the league is doing things the right way, particularly when it comes to its hiring practices and diversity and inclusion practices.
I appreciate that. My next question is to do from the student focus. Many of the students at our member institutions are viewing the WNBA as the exemplar, as the benchmark for activism, for embracing engagement with millennial and Gen Z consumers. How do you view a student preparing for the new age of working in the sports industry, is particularly working for the WNBA? What kind of qualities should they be focusing on when they're building their strengths in their portfolios?
Well, I think it's true for any league, there are some, I think, additional considerations when you are working at a women's sports league. For anybody that's thinking about a career in sports, I think that it's important to have a foundational skill set. And I think that translates across industry. Before I came to the NBA, I worked at Deloitte in strategy and operations consulting. And though my heart and passion is certainly around sports, it was important for me to have that time at Deloitte because it allowed me to have a foundation that and exposure across industry that I could bring to the sports world. And I think I would not have the perspective that I have if I hadn't actually pursued a different career path first. And obviously I played, and so I feel like I actually kind of had two careers before I came to the NBA, and WNBA ultimately after that. But I do think that the ability to work in teams, communicate well, think analytically, problem solve, build relationships that are meaningful. Those are all things that you can be doing now, and then as you get further along in your career, certainly you develop some specialties. But it's hard in the sports world too, because sometimes it helps to be very specific about what it is that you want to do, and you start to kind of dive in and specialize. But I think that having a kind of broad business undergirding is really important, and then you can kind of go from anywhere, because it's really just about working hard and building the right relationships. And then for the WNBA specifically, I think you have to be gritty. I mean, I think you actually have to, I think that's true for sports generally. It's, obviously a lot of people want to work in sports, and it's hard to sometimes differentiate yourself. But I think that like for the WNBA and for small leagues that, I think are in the early part of their growth phase, like you have to be willing to kind of roll your sleeves up and do anything. I wear a lot of different hats at the league in my role. I oversee mostly things that happen on the court, things related to governance and schedule and player matters. But certainly this summer, part of my role was driving forward our social justice platform. And that was part of my personal interest and passion around the subject matter. But it was definitely a willingness too to say like this is as important as like my day job, so to speak. And so I'm, the willingness to take on what needs to be taken on to drive the business forward or to push forward the mission and the values of the league, then you have to do that. So I think that something to keep in mind is the perseverance in it. Certainly for our league, and I think it's true across sports.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I love the the nugget of information about perseverance and true grit and pushing through your goals. Um, you have a very fantastic career path. I mean, your time overseas, your time playing, your educational background from Stanford and then the Wharton MBA, past experiences at fantastic companies like the Walt Disney Company, as well as the Deloitte Consulting, and then the MBA. Did you know that you were going to come back to the NBA in this capacity? Was that a hope when you were at the NBA or prior at Deloitte?
No, I mean, I think that I thought at some point I would come back to sports. When I stopped playing, for me, it was really important to try something completely outside of my comfort zone. So my first job after I retired from basketball was working at the Walt Disney Company in their finance department. I was very uncomfortable and, trying to build out a skill set. And so I think it's really hard to grow without some discomfort. And so, it was really important for me to dive into an experience like that. And I think along the way, for me, it was I leveraged my networks quite a bit to find out what people did, understand different career paths, and so taking that role at Disney as an example was just a way for me to understand more about what's out there, and so that I certainly learned that I didn't necessarily want to work in finance, but it was important for me to be able to use the skills that you need when you are working in a function like that. So I ended up having really great conversations, meeting a lot of great people, understanding the different career paths that people took. And so I always intended to figure out how they got to where they were. And for me, why I ended up going back to school and going to business school specifically is that I saw people in roles that I found really interesting. I thought I could be motivated in. And there was, when you think about here's the role that I want and here's where I am and here's this gap, and can an advanced degree help you fill that gap? For me, it was, the answer was yes. And for me, a full-time MBA program worked out really well and helped me in my career progression. But it's a different path for everybody. I think, for me, the MBA was something that I found flexibility in, and it allowed me to work across different industries. But I think there's a lot of different paths you can take and still be successful in sports.
All right, great. And then my final question to close the loop on the topic of the WNBA's commitment to social justice. Where do you see these social justice efforts in the next 5 years? A lot can happen. There's a new president in the Oval Office, and the world is changing. The world is almost hopeful for a healing. And so where do you see the world in 5 years, or where do you see the WNBA's role in social justice in 5 years?
Wow. Well, I don't know that anybody can see 5 years from now. I think the last year taught us to throw out all our plans when we make them long term in that way. Look, there's still a lot in the air. We're still navigating a global pandemic. We're still navigating, the social unrest that we were navigating when we started the 2020 season, and that we've been navigating for the entire history of our country. So, I think that it's hard to predict what the next 5 years will look like. I'm excited about the growth of the league. I'm excited about the attention that the league has been getting. I'm excited about the way the game is growing and the quality of the product that's on the court. Sometimes it gets lost in all the conversation that like our game is really good. and the athletes that are coming into our league are more and more talented. And so I do think that the attention, I think there's still a call to action. I think the media coverage is really important. The role of corporate sponsorships is really important, and women's sports still gets a really tiny fraction of sports sponsorship dollars. So what I'd like to see over the course of the next several years is a change in some of those statistics, more media coverage, more corporate sponsors, and more recognition that the product on the court is quality and that the WNBA deserves a place at the table with any major sports league. So, I think that that's what I'm hoping. I'm certainly seeing the seeds of that. I think that, the CBA that we finished in 2020 has laid a foundation for us to grow and show our commitment to women and to the values that they hold important. And so, I'm excited for that progression for our league and think that certainly the 2020 season is the start of something much bigger. And I have high hopes for what we can do as we execute a business model transformation.
All right, Bethany, that was fantastic. I want to thank you for your time today. And to everyone out there joining us, thank you for coming and joining us for the Cosmic Keynote presentation on the WNBA's commitment to social justice. Thank you.
We can start the conversation off as we wait for someone to come in. Bethany, we're all coming from a background of practice faculty, right? Teaching in the classroom. What is something you think that for our students to engage them in these types of conversation about equitable issues, promoting race in society? What are ways that faculty could do a better job promoting students in the classroom, do you think?
Well, first of all, I think with a job that you have as educators is so critical, and I think that I wouldn't begin to assume that I have advice for people that are cultivating minds in the way that you are. But I think one of the things that was really clear about what we were trying to do is that there's so much that we didn't know, and I think being honest about what we didn't know was a really good foundation for the conversation that we were able to have with players, with our team leadership, with ultimately the cohort of advisors that came to the table, because I think it was good to admit, we're trying to figure this out as we go, and we're building a platform that we think is going to be compelling, but we wouldn't begin to assume that we know everything that we need to impact and create the change that we're looking to see. So I think starting from a place of what can we do to educate ourselves and bring the right people to the table to do that was really important. So as you think about these learning moments for your students, like who needs to come to the table with you, who needs to be your partner in the conversation, so that you can really open up new areas and stretch the boundaries of where you have typically communicated in the past.
Great. And I'm speaking for myself, given my positionality, that is something that I've had to adjust to a lot in the last couple of semesters in talking about bringing these more to the forefront in the classroom. We have a question from Dr. Colleen Collis at MSU Denver.
Hi, again, thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. And one thing that I'm thinking of doing with our senior class is to use this example from the WNBA as a case study moving forward and how things evolve. Is there anything when I have them research that we wouldn't be able to find from all of the media coverage that maybe you could share with us of something that we could have the students also think about that maybe wasn't broadcast, but that you knew internally, maybe that you did really well, or how this all came about and was so successful, but might not be something we can get from other media sources?
Yeah, it's interesting because so much of what we did was insular. Like we were trying to create, authentic conversations, and we had, and obviously like the players were sensitive about like what we were doing and making sure that we were approaching it respectfully And so I do think a lot of it didn't get covered by the media because of how we approached it. And I think that was the right way to do it because the subject matter was so important and so sensitive. So I can say that, a lot of we did have, several internal conversations that we called like powerful conversations, where we convened, political, elected officials and activists across different facets of social justice. In some cases, we included media in the conversation just so that we could get some of the storytelling out in our broadcasts. But overall, I think that we're trying to lay the foundation, and I think we can start having some more public conversations now that the players feel a little bit more knowledgeable. I like to say that like our players were in a spectrum of maturity when it came to their activism. We had a player like Leja Clarendon who was very advanced and connected in the social justice space, and then we had other places where players were just trying to figure out what they were passionate about. And so, recognizing that, and then kind of what can the league do to create organization and structure around how each player pursues their own path toward fighting for social justice. So I think, as you talk to students or create a case study around this, I think, the problem we were trying to solve was like, how can we conduct a season in a single site and solve for how players are feeling about where they are in the world and how they're going to use their platforms. And then, there's some things that we did create a social justice portal on WNBA.com. So if you want to go in there, you can see kind of some of the different elements of what we did. And we created kind of like 4 buckets of content there. So we have, the Social Justice Council, which was a like kind of central piece of our platform. We have the there's a voting. I mean, it's not probably as up to date as it was leading into November, but there was kind of information that linking back to our kind of collaborative efforts with the NBA and our voting partners around getting people out to vote. We had a kind of a content series that we developed around each of the players that were part of the Social Justice Council, so you can hear their stories about why they joined the council and what social justice means to them. And there's, I think there's one more bucket that I'm forgetting from, off the top of my head, but go on the site and you'll kind of see some of the pillars of what we were working on as you build out what you want to take your students through.
Great. I'll jump in and ask another question. We just are on the tail end of another college football and professional football hiring period where, again, the diversity of hirings is again the thing being talked about the most, and the lack of diversity of hirings. What does the WNBA do to promote equitable hiring practices and diversity in terms of their coaching staffs?
Yeah, so we've done, I think we're working on it. I mean, obviously the Tides report, is a good indication of where we are, but I think we also know that there's still ground to cover. So one of the things that we are looking at is our hiring practices across the different, pieces of our business. So but that's both business and basketball operations. And from a coaching standpoint, one of the things that we're focused on is building a pipeline of talent and making sure that we have a better sense for the people that want to coach in our league. And, we also, going into the 2020 season, we created a new policy around former players being part of the coaching staff. So, how can we make sure that there's a route back into our coaching ranks once you have finished your playing career? And so we have, many of our teams actually took us up on this policy that allows you to have an additional assistant that sits on the front of the bench if you have a former player on your staff. And so that's helped us to start to create, kind of a better pipeline of former players that are coming into our coaching ranks as well. But there's more to be done. Obviously, Vicki Johnson being hired in Dallas as head coach there, and she is the only Black woman head coach in our league. And, we understand, like, while we're happy that she's in the role that she is, like, we know that for a league that has, at least 70% Black, that there's opportunity there still. So we're having the conversations. I think that, having open conversation about what needs to get better, and, what we're doing well, and where we have some room to grow from a hiring and, development and retention standpoint. That's all things that we're focused on.
Thank you. We have a question from Maggie Tudor at the University of Tampa.
Hi, Bethany. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and your openness during the talk earlier last week. So one thing that I kind of picked up on, you shared with us that you were naturally kind of thrown into this area of social justice just by being a Black female in the WNBA, in college athletics and things like that. But do you have any advice for us as professors and faculty who are working with younger people who don't have that natural experience, young white men, white females, and how can we engage them to have that conversation and feel a little bit more open? How can we empower them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the NBA family of leagues has talked about this to some extent, and how allyship works. And, I think that you have to really, train around, like, how to be an ally. And there's more work that we have to do around that. I will say that I'm limited in my ability to respond to that, because some of the most prominent, white athletes in our league were the most vocal about what we were doing from a social justice standpoint. When you think of somebody like Sue Bird or Breanna Stewart. So I do think that there is an education around, how to be an ally. And, we shared kind of reading lists with players, podcasts. You can actually, that's actually some of the stuff that's on the website. Now that was a bucket I forgot. Where we put together things so that every player could feel included in, the education process that we were all going through. And so, there's no perfect answer. I think it's, some of it is just listening to the stories and creating a safe space for the people who are the most impacted by racial injustice to talk about it in front of people who may be made uncomfortable by hearing it. And so I think that the more there's vulnerability in opening up about, the various experiences that people have encountering injustice, there's not just one perspective. The young white students that you have their own encounters with what they understand to be racial injustice. So opening up safe spaces for them to talk about what that was like for them, I think is important, in addition to some of the education resources that are available.
Question from Zach Mayo at St. Mary's University of Minnesota.
Hi, how are you? I added my question to the chat. I didn't know when you were going to finish speaking. So my question would be, do you foresee a possibility of partnering with a university in some sort of an interconnected forum, right? Maybe between your athletes and the university's athletes or whatnot, to come together on those social justice issues, similar to how you had set up your council. Could you foresee a interconnected professional and university athletic type of a council? And if so, how can we be the first?
I will admit we haven't gotten that far. I think we're, our platform, and it's kind of the formal platform that we announced is less than a year old. We're still working through how, as an example, our advisors kind of what the term of an advisor looks like, as an example, right? So, I think that it's clear that there are efforts around social justice and like multi-stakeholder coalitions, at all levels of sports. So, the NCAA has one, like the NBA coaches have one. The NBA has a formal coalition now, and so there's I think we're still all figuring out how we collaborate with each other and what the intersection points are. I certainly think education is a good one to all coalesce around. And so I think it's definitely not outside the realm of possibility that we would look for more of that kind of interconnected forum. I couldn't give you a time frame on it or what it looks like, but I do think that there's more. We have natural relationships with different sports stakeholders. So that's the NCAA, Women's Basketball Coaches Association. Like there's, and like what are the ways that those organizations are capturing the conversations that somebody like Maggie is having with her students, around allyship, and what are some of the things that you're hearing as Colleen goes through a case study on what are some of the things that you're learning that then kind of bubble up to a conversation that we might have with the NCAA. So I think there's a lot to figure out there, but I think it's a good idea.
Great. Maybe time for one more question if anyone wants to jump in. All right, that's great. Thank you, Bethany, very much for your time today and for your presentation. Really great, and to get the WNBA's perspective and your perspective was really great and really valuable for me personally. I know for a lot of our attendees. So I'll give you the final say, and thank you again.
No, thank you, and thank you for engaging and wanting to ask some additional questions. I think the fact that people are so interested in this conversation and are so intrigued by what the league did is really rewarding, and an indication that we're going to keep this work moving forward. And so thank you for what you're doing in the education space, and how you're preparing the next generation of people that are going to be doing this work. So kudos to you.